Hello, my name is Lizzie. I'm Anglican. In about 4 months' time, I'm going to be entering a convent ready to become a postulant. And here's a good question. Are nuns more holy than other Christians? And I thought it would be very appropriate to film this little video from in front of my desk at work. I will hold your people in my heart. I suppose over the years we've kind of built up a stereotype of what holiness looks like, and it's probably not helped by the fact that a lot of people in stained glass windows in churches seem to float around in long robes with halos around their head. So almost automatically, any Christian that has to wear a robe or a habit might sort of in popular stereotype kind of just look more holy somehow because they look a bit more like these people in stained glass windows who are just wearing the normal clothes of their time. And if we looked at modern saints or like modern like more recent Christians who people have felt were very holy, they might equally just be in a denim jacket or leather jacket or jeans or something. So yeah, it doesn't help that in our culture we've got this sort of thing of holy people sort of float off the ground in long robes with halos. And I suppose another stereotype is the one of someone sort of kneeling with their eyes closed, looking very pious, or with their eyes like really fixed on a cross or something. There's like this sort of very pious image you sometimes get in pictures. Whereas in reality, if you're going to walk around with your eyes closed, you're just going to trip over something within a few meters. Or if you're in church and you're praying, I mean, not that it's wrong to pray intensely, but in reality, if you're always going to be so piously glued to looking at a cross or something, you're going to start ignoring the people around you that need you to interact with them and talk with them. And then moving on from what a holy person might look like, in terms of popular thoughts of what a holy person might do or how they might come across, I suppose it's sort of seen that if you're in church a lot, you must be a holy person, or if you go to a lot of services, or if you set aside a lot of time in the day to pray, or possibly if you do a lot of Christian activities or do a lot of outreach work, then surely that means you must be holy. But that's not necessarily the case at all. So I suppose, I mean, I'm not suggesting I'm some kind of expert in what is holiness, but I've thought about that kind of question obviously before. And a lot of the stuff that I've read and a lot of sermons I've heard over the years suggest that holiness is much more about just doing what God wants you to be doing when God wants you to be doing it. So you could actually be in church when God wants you somewhere else, or you could be praying when God needs you to be, like sort of praying at home or in church, or when God needs you to be out helping people, or just doing something very ordinary. Or you could be actually using Christian activity or things that feel more spiritual to you as a way of avoiding the more mundane thing that God wants you to be doing that might not feel Christian or spiritual at all. So doing what God wants you to be doing is much more, I think, what holiness is about. So quite often what is actually holy probably doesn't at all look like what our stereotypes or our culture see as holy. I suppose really when you talk about a holy person, really in my mind, like, God's the Holy One. One of the phrases we often get in the services that I go to is that God is the source of holiness. So really, I don't think it's so much that people are holy, it's just that certain people are so in tune with God or so open to God and so empty of themselves in a way that lets God flow through them, that they're just showing or radiating God's holiness more than that they themselves are holy. And that's probably, you know, how people in paintings are sometimes depicted with a halo over their head. That's probably just a picture way of trying to get across the fact that these people seemed to radiate something of God's joy and peace and love. So if holy people don't actually walk around with halos above their heads and floating around in robes, and if they're not necessarily, the people that culture sees as holy, how do you spot a holy person? It is a really good question, I suppose. And personally, if you're asking like, well, what are the main characteristics of a holy person, one of the first things I would definitely say is that they would be very down to earth and very practical minded. And when you look at saints over the centuries, the people that Christians agree were particularly holy all were very, very down to earth and practical, and quite often also very had a good sense of humor, knew just to have how to just have a good conversation and a laugh with people. Like they weren't sort of standing apart from other people, looking down on them, or being overly pious or even overly spiritual. And I guess another mark of holiness is that a holy person would actually not have you looking at them, that they'd always turn your attention either to God or that they would just put the focus of their attention on you and show genuine interest in you and help you feel very loved and accepted, and that they were very interested in you. And linked to that, I don't think that a holy person would necessarily talk about particularly spiritual things all the time, or things that we would call like kind of spiritual. It's not that they're not, but when I do street passes, we have lots of conversations of people that aren't about Christian themes. They're just about what's going on in their lives, like maybe their family life or their exams, or just why they got that tattoo, or all kinds of things. And those conversations actually aren't any less spiritually important, but that they don't come across as overtly spiritual. But I can imagine that a holy person would they'd just be like so down to earth and see God in so much of the world, and know that God's not confined to religious talk or more obviously like Christian or churchy things, that they would not actually talk about God or spiritual things as much as you might expect a holy person to. And I suppose if you go backwards in time, we've got all these layers of centuries of saints that people recognised as particularly holy Christians. But if you look at Jesus himself, he wasn't, I mean, yeah, he might have worn something that looked more like a robe, but he wasn't one of these people that floated off the ground and spent all his day praying in the temple, or always talking about really spiritual things necessarily. Like we see him in the Gospels just hanging out with people where they are, going to parties, just but so much of the Gospels seem to show a Jesus that people felt that he radiated something, and that they really felt touched by him. And that, I think, is the holiness that was radiating out of him. It wasn't his piousness, or whatever word we might use. It was just things like the interest he showed in other people, and again how down to earth he was. A few years ago, I spent quite a lot of time studying this whole topic of how holiness is and spirituality and Christianity is so much wider than churchiness and churchianity. And I spent a lot of time reading Francis de Sales, who lived a few centuries ago, and he in particular wrote a lot of letters giving spiritual guidance to people who weren't like priests and nuns and monks. And at the time, people thought you had to be a priest or a nun or a monk to have a deep spiritual life or to be holy. And he was saying, no, that's not the case at all. And so in these letters, he talked to people that had different jobs or who were, or whose vocation was to be a wife or a mother and things. And he would talk to them about, you're called to be just as holy as a nun is or a priest, because all Christians are called to holiness. And he'd show them how their workplace or their home life or their home, that was their place of spiritual growth and where they grew in holiness and could be holy. And you might have heard the phrase bloom where you're planted, and that was one of he was the one that came up with that phrase originally, I think. And he would keep coming back to that the whole thing of holiness is doing what God wants you to be doing when God wants you to be doing it, and it's often the thing right in front of you that God wants you to be doing, even if it doesn't seem very spiritual or Christian or something. And another one of his phrases was be who you are and be that perfectly. So yeah, he was really trying to emphasize that holiness isn't these. He's trying to get rid of all these stereotypes of what holiness is and what maybe deep prayer life or deep spiritual life is. Get rid of the stereotypes, because actually holiness and deep spiritual life and prayerfulness, for a lot of us, it's lived out and grown in the workplace, at home, in driving in the car, in the supermarket, in changing nappies. So to recap it, if holiness is about doing what God wants, and if it's about living in a state of constantly being aware of God in whatever you're doing or whoever you're talking to or whatever non-spiritual activity you're engaged in, and if it's about being open to God and being a channel of God at all times and then radiating God's love and peace and joy, you realize that holiness isn't dependent on all these stereotypical things like being in church or being having a vocation that is stereotypically more religious, pious, something like that. You realize that holiness equally belongs in being at home, putting dinner on the table, work, doing the shopping, anything that your day holds, really. So I'm pretty sure Francis de Sales and lots of people would say that no, nuns are not at all any more holy than other Christians, and they'd be keen to say that get rid of all these layers of stereotypes, because holiness is about being linked, being open to God and being linked to God somehow, much more than it is about sort of these outward Christian things of church services and church activity and spiritual activity. God can be encountered, and God can work in absolutely any activity and in any geographical place, whether it's Christian religious or not at all Christian and not at all religious.